then let's say if you listen to black resentment in the South, then you might start letting blacks eat at the lunch counter. And if you listen to women's resentment, you might, you start giving women equal salaries and that kind of thing. And you always have to wonder how far to go in every detail, but the point is that it's the epistemology of resentment that has really characterized the modern era. Personally, I don't find that very pleasant, but I think I realize how significant it is. But so I think that the injection of morality, in other words, into ethics, it can never be total. You want to create this, the moral apocalypse, you create Auschwitz and the Gulag, but when you want to create, the good society, you try to create compromises by listening to other people's resentments and trying to figure out the best way to negotiate them, and that's what makes liberal democracy the worst system with the exception of all the others. And by the way, talking about violence and representation, you can just quote old Winston Churchill that jaw is better than war. And talking, even if, when two guys are about to fight, you try to get them to talk, discuss it. Sometimes with places like North Korea, you may not be doing it the right way, but in any case, I don't think that the sign has some kind of fetishistic value, but it's our way of deferring resentment and, deferring violence. So,
a question?
This is, if we compare this to the potluck, my contribution, my part of the partage is to just reflect on what I've been reading. And there are a few things that converge. One of them is that, and if we pick up on what you're talking about, we can frame it in terms of justice. And Francis de Waal has done experiments with chimpanzees to show that they have a sense of justice. And one of the experiments involves one chimpanzee who's here and can see one here in a cage and one here in the cage, and the two that are in these two other cages can't see one another. And what happens over a period of time is that one of the chimpanzees is given lots to eat and the other is given very little to eat, and then the third chimpanzee who sees them both is given a surplus. And this chimpanzee shares it with the one who has been given very little. Very interesting. There's a sense of fairness even at that primate level. Now, Stuart Kaufman has been arguing for the principle of emergent creativity, and he says, okay, biology emerged from inorganic matter, and then various life forms emerged, but at a certain point, the principle of emergent creativity applied to the emergence of morality and justice and things that are invisible. They're not tangible, they're not material, but the same principle has been working. Now, if we think about and so he says there is the emergence of that sense of justice. And likewise, other evolutionary biologists have been saying that in order to survive, we had to have a sense of collective survival, and in order to survive as a collective, we had to be able to reconcile with one another rather than kill each other off. So, Morton Deutsch, primary theorist in political science in the field of conflict studies, has really developed the idea of social justice, and he says social justice revolves around the principles of equality, where everybody gets the same, the principle of equity, where people get something in proportion to either their efforts or ability, they get something in proportion to what they put into the situation, and the principle of need, that where there are particular needs, somebody is entitled to do this. So if we go back to that originary scene, putting this all together, and we're emerging from the alpha male having first rights, first dibs at this, and all of a sudden there's going to be a transition from everybody in it for themselves in an unthinking, unself-conscious way to a sense of there being a collective and the importance of the collective all of a sudden sinking in. Then we can say that that abortive gesture is based on the emergence of a sense of justice that says that I, as the person aborting my gesture to get as much as I can for myself. And basically saying in Morton Deutsch's categories, we all have to be equal, so there's no point in my being ahead of the others. Anybody who does get it first has put in more effort. Well, we've all done this collectively, and I don't have a right to go in there because I've done more. And everybody gets something according to their need, and everybody's need is the same, so I can't go in there because I have a greater need. So I guess what I'm saying is that in a sense I'm getting hooked by generative anthropology by starting to flesh out some new categories and look at that originary scene through the perspective of emergent creativity and the emergence of justice and a sense of justice.
I mean, the thing that, I mean, everything you say is very reasonable, but the reason that, the thing that I think GA makes a genuine advance over these type of social science models, which is not to say that, you know, the originary scene is some kind of a holy grail that can't be modified. You saw Katz, for instance, suggest a useful modification, and there may be others. But I think that, you know, it may be that chimpanzees have, well, I hesitate to talk about ideas in animals. You know, chimpanzees can share food. I don't think that means they have an idea of justice. They may have, you know, feel sorry for one that doesn't have as much food. I'm not, you know, they may, you know, they have emotions. I don't think that it's useful to talk about ideas, because if you don't have words, you don't have ideas. I don't think that, you know, the Platonic world of ideas exists before the words that we use to express those ideas. So I think it's much more minimal to find a scenario. In other words, you're suggesting that these proto-humans sort of altruistically decide not to take more than they need and so on. Well, you need some kind of a social structure and a violence prevention mechanism. And the fact that animals have such mechanisms shows that the mimetic rivalry doesn't just begin with the humans. So I think it's much more economical or parsimonious to say that they got the idea of justice from the symmetry that they observe in the originary scene. I don't think that, in other words, I don't think that the beta animal feels that a sense of injustice or even resentment in the human sense because he's second and the alpha animal was first. He just feels that he's inhibited because he knows the alpha animal is stronger, and then they're constantly challenging each other. But animals have no sense of a collectivity, as far as I know, and the alpha-beta system is essentially one-on-one. It's a collectivity, but not, or if you like, it's a collectivity, but not a community. But the idea of the originary scene defines the community. And I think that would be the source of any notion of justice. But, you know, if you went to speak to a member of a hunter-gatherer society, you know, you would probably find that there was more a sense that it was wrong in a very religious sense to, in fact, I remember talking in Vancouver, I wish I had a text now, there was some guy who had done some research on, you know, how these societies actually operate. And the vocabulary is very close to the vocabulary of GA, is basically the idea that, no, you don't take that extra thing because that's just, you know, that's just bad. You know, it's not a matter of what we would call a sense of justice in modern terms. It's very linked to a kind of religious fear. And that's what, you know, that central object, that's the sacred. I mean, think of the numinosity of the central object.
Does that become justice later? Or is it even helpful to ask that kind of a question?
Well, I don't want to monopolize this, but I think that the notion of justice is, you know, either you want to think of it in very general terms as, you know, justice meaning the equality of the originary scene. In other words, what I call the moral model. I use the word model rather than the idea of morality. Or you want to define justice as a kind of an idea of the sort that you will find in Plato, in which case the history of the notion of justice probably begins a hell of a lot later than the originary scene, because you're talking about reflection on justice. I think it would be useful to distinguish. That's why I think the moral model is something that you kind of know from